Now the time is up. So we are going to start, and I hope that you all are hearing me well. My name is Joomaay, and I am from Senegal, even though I live here in Princeton, New Jersey. I am a Pan-Africanist, I guess, a Pan-African Federalist, to be more precise. My purpose today is just to introduce a discussion on a topic, that we certainly is central to uh, this event, which is neocolonialism. We all talk about neocolonialism, but you cannot fight something that you don't understand. You cannot defeat something that you can understand. So this is why I have chosen to really present, my understanding of neocolonialism. So I'll say as a good procedure, you state by in greetings, sisters and brothers. First and foremost, allow me to thank and congratulate the organizers of the forum for the exchange of ideas on understanding and ending neocolonialism. We need more and such great initiatives. It is a great initiative because this debate, which was indeed started right after the so-called independences were gained, was interrupted many times by it was started by pioneers like if you want Kwame Nkrumah, you have Sheikh Anta Diop, you have many others who had started this debate, but it was interrupted. Now it is great to see an organization that is trying to reignite the flame for restarting this debate. It is an honor and great pleasure for me to introduce this discussion on what is neocolonialism, how does it operate and is sustained, and last but not least, how this imperialist mode of production can be revamped, and who shall be playing a leadership role in this revolutionary endeavor. The word neocolonialism appeared in the political literature around the 1960s after the independence was granted to a great deal of African countries south of the Sahara Desert. The All African Peoples Conference, held in Cairo in 1961, defined neocolonialism as the survival of a colonial system in spite of the formal recognition of political independence in emerging countries, which become the victims of an indirect and subtle form of domination by political, economic, social, military, and technical means. As far as profitability for the capitalist and sustainability as a system are concerned, neocolonialism is an enhanced form of imperialist control. It requires much less investment from the imperialist power and is less repulsive in the common eyes of the colonized. It does not require the costly military occupation, which is a constant eyesore to the colonized. The relationship is founded on agreement based on international laws, meaning ratified treaties between the imperialists and the neocolony, even though their terms and conditions are ridiculously in favor of the imperialists. These legally binding agreements between independent nations are very difficult to revoke, even though their inhumane terms and conditions are accepted by the neocolony through intimidation and coercive methods. Only a state which has the right type of sovereignty could revoke this agreement, and a united African state will be such type. This is why Kuma and them were always struggling for it. No country becomes a neocolony of another willy-nilly and by pleasurable choice. The neocolonial system in which most African countries are trapped in today is the result of a plan that was well concocted and wonderfully executed by the former colonizers. It is being kept alive through shrewd planning by the imperialist powers, particularly the newcomers like China, Russia, India, Japan, and even Turkey. Besides the insatiable desire for profit of capitalists, which motivates its relentless expansionist drive, particularly at its imperialist phase, there are systemic defects which force countries to enter into this form of relation with an imperialist power, regardless of the attitude of the political leadership of the country towards imperialism. Ghana was no less a neo-colony of Great Britain. Let me repeat. Ghana was no less a neo-colony of Great Britain under Kwame Nkrumah than Liberia under William Tubman was one of the United States. Burkina Faso under Thomas Sankara was no less of a neo-colony of France than Cote d'Ivoire under Houphouët-Boigny or Senegal at the Senghor War. The following systemic defects of the country are what makes it vulnerable to neocolonialism. Number one, its non-viability, which is either due to their size or to the destruction of their social capital. I will explain later. This non-viability is not the result of a chance, but of a plan well concocted and executed marvelously by the former colonizers. Many believe that there is no correlation between the size of a country and its viability as a standalone unit. The proponent of this theory or thesis give as example the small countries in Europe which are functioning as viable entities. What they forget, as Paul Barron explains in The Political Economy of Growth, is that these small countries in size participate in the Western European looting of Africa, Asia, and the pre-European settler Americas for their initial accumulation of capital. And it is obvious that their today viability is rooted in that big steal which started in the 16th century and is still being continued today under the form of neocolonialism. It's the second element that it makes a country vulnerable to neocolonialism is its deficiency in sovereignty, which is a consequence of their non-viability. Many people confuse independence, which is the recognition of the right to exist on the world stage, with sovereignty, which is a combination of the freedom to choose one's policy, which means independence, and the wherewithal to implement those policies regardless of any outside entity's opinion on them, which is called positive sovereignty. The third element that makes a country vulnerable to neocolonialism is its vulnerability in general, meaning its weakness. This is the inability to protect itself from any form of illegal domestic and foreign aggression. It is a direct consequence of their non-viability and their lack of full sovereignty. The political instability of the African countries on the continent of Africa and the Caribbean islands, because of the repetitive coup d'etat and post-electoral riots, are some of the most visible symptoms of the structural deficiency of these states. The capacity of a foreign power to mingle in the domestic, unpunished, in the domestic affair of another is a symptom of vulnerability. The USA's repeated aggression on Haiti since its independence and the NATO removal of Gaddafi are undeniable proofs of the vulnerability of these states. The independence, meaning the right to make policy choices, enjoyed by neocolonies, makes it possible for neocolonialism to be multi-directional. In other words, a neocolony can be in the claws of more than one imperialist. In fact, this is the most common case nowadays. During direct colonialism, there could only be one colonizer on the political front, even though on the economic one, there were rarely an occasion where only the capitalists of that country were looting the colonized people with the authorization of the colonial power. Because of the capacity of an independent country, regardless of the nature of their sovereignty, to choose its policy and the fierce competition between the imperialist countries, a neocolony can distribute the share of the management of its sovereign right with two or more imperialist countries. A neocolony could distribute the share in the management of its sovereign right with two or more imperialist powers. The cases of the Central African Republic and of Mali are evidence of this possibility. While Russia has been given in both cases involved part in the management of their national security, France remained the main manager of their monetary policies through the CFA, their local comprador bourgeoisie, whether it is Mali or the Central African Republic, is still in the claws of the French industrial and financial capital. The unhinged liberty of a state, of the African state particularly, to make policies which surrender some of the portion of their sovereignty to another entity can be used to end neocolonialism. Let me repeat that. The capacity of the African states to make policies which are a surrender of some of the portions of their sovereignty to another entity can be used to end neocolonialism. Through referendum and other legal citizen action activities, perfectly legal in the democratic decision-making process in the African countries, we could defeat imperialism and create the United African States. In order to end neocolonialism, one must understand, must find means and ways in which these objective realities, which create vulnerability to neocolonialism, can be gotten rid of. Neocolonialism is a system. No amount of reform can make it work for the neocolonized. No form of condemnation can end it. No endeavor through any court of justice can end it. Only the organized effort of the victim can put an end to it through a revolution which does not have to be violent, as explained above. It was the observation of these structural flaws and the need for a revolutionary change that prompted Barthélemy Boganda to give his life to the creation of the Central African Republic, a republic that would bring together all the former colonies of Belgium and France located in Central Africa and form a republic. This is the same reason why Mwalimu Julius Nyerere did everything he could to create the East Africa Federation. It was the same reason that motivated Leopold Sédar Senghor in Senegal and Modibo Keïta in Mali to do everything in their power to replace French West Africa with the Mali Federation. It is this observation that also prompted Kwame Nkrumah to devote a significant part of his political capital and the resources of the Ghanaian state to the campaign for a Union of African States, and then later a Ghana-Guinea-Mali Federation. Cheikh Anta Diop, Patrice Lumumba, later Mohamed Gaddafi, and many others had made the same observation and had invested themselves in finding means and ways to get rid of these systemic defects of the African state, which are being used by the imperialists to transform them into neocolonies. They all believe that only the political unification of a large majority of the African state could give birth to a viable federal political entity, which could allow the African people to dwarf the Machiavellian plans of the former colonizers, which was to create independent but non-viable states across Africa and the Caribbean. States that are either non-viable by their size, like Senegal, the Republic of Congo, Sierra Leone, Rwanda, Gambia, and so on, to only name a few, or with a low, almost zero social capital, and therefore unstable and no possibility for political development, like Nigeria, like the Democratic Republic of Congo. The terrain for a successful political unification of the African states and their liberation from neocolonialism is today more than ever fertile. However, despite its fertility, we all know that finishing the job that was started by Marcus Garvey in 1920 will not be easy. What then are the challenges that activists for African political unity for the end of neocolonialism must overcome in order to succeed in their mission? For the better understanding of these challenges, we are going to associate them with the actors on the political scene on Africa and the Caribbean in our countries that are their material support. While doing so, we will also explain what are objectively their class interests, which determine their attitude toward the neocolonial system and any effort like the political unification of our state, which is intended to end neocolonialism. This will allow us to have a clearer understanding of the negative and positive factors in the fight against neocolonialism. It is on the basis of this knowledge that we will be able to identify means and ways on how to neutralize these negative forces while optimizing the capacity of the positive forces as suggested by Kwame Nkrumah in his book, Conscientialism. The struggle for political unification of the African state involved five main actors: the imperialists themselves, the African natural allies of imperialism, the African intellectuals, the militant for African unity, and finally, the African popular masses. Let's start with imperialism. But in regard to the imperialists, it is redundant to say that they will use all the means at their disposal to nip in the bud any credible revolutionary project of political unification of African states. I said revolutionary project because there are out there projects for African unification that are indeed designed to maintain neocolonialism. This is perfectly normal that the imperialists, because it's their bread and butter, they have to oppose any effort that will lead to the end of neocolonialism. To try through marches or the signing of petition to persuade the imperialists to stop their immoral imperialist policies which are causing mayhem in their neocolonies in Africa and elsewhere is a naive waste of time. The strategy of moral suasion has never put an end to oppressive system. However, despite their immense resources and the powerful bloc constituted by their allies in the neocolonial countries, their mighty force can be brought to a level where their capacity to slow down or stop the revolution for the end of neocolonialism will be negligible. Yes, the imperialists are powerful. Yes, they have non-negligible allies in the African ground, but their capacity to foil the effort deployed in the revolution for the end of neocolonialism rely heavily on African men and women who could be neutralized if the right strategy is used against them. The first Pan-African Federalist Congress organized by the Pan-African Federalist Movement from December 8 to December 22nd, 2023, has precisely as its main objective the research and adoption of an action plan toward the birth of the United African State, which will include this element of neutralizing the allies of neocolonialism and the allies of the imperialists. We in the Pan-African Federalism Movement are convinced that if we sit down and discuss sincerely, we can provide an action plan to unite the African state that no force in the world can prevent us from implementing successfully. The second group is the natural allies, of the imperialists. The natural allies are those whose group interests are intrinsically linked to the interests of the imperialists. The first is in that group is that those who control the sale of raw material to the industries of the European powers, of the imperialist powers, and ensure the flow in the African market of the finished product, of their finished product. Their intrinsic link with the industrial and financial bourgeoisie of the imperialist power make them natural allies of imperialism. It is important to point out here that from this comprador bourgeoisie is emerging people like Ali Dangote, who are an embryo of the African industrial bourgeoisie, which will need an African state capable of protecting its interests, which can only be a united African state. The second group of natural allies of the imperialists are those who hold political power. For African political leaders, it is the non-viability of their state, that puts them in this situation. The most visible symptoms of the non-viability are first and foremost their chronic fiscal deficit, which forces them to rely on so-called grants and loans to make ends meet. The second is the inability to properly manage all the portion of their sovereignty. This forces them, whether they want it or not, to accept to cede to an outside entity, country, or institution the management of certain portion of their sovereignty. In most cases, the former colonial power is the choice. However, the new imperialist powers like China and Russia are being chosen because of the misguided belief that they do not have imperialist ambition, because at the superficial level, their conditions seem to be less harsh. These portions of sovereignty are, for example, security, foreign policy, debt management, currency, to only name the most visible one. In order not to anger these powers on which they depend to maintain the survival not of their people, but of their states, the question of the political unification of the African countries by Africans for Africans, which is a real threat to imperialist interests, become a sort of taboo subject that must be avoided at all costs. What happened to Boganda, Lumumba, Nkrumah, Sankara, and Gaddafi, to name a few, is an indicator of what could happen to them if they challenge the interests of imperialism. However, it must be recognized that some of them can support the unification project if the right approach is used to involve them. The Pan-African Federalist Movement is already using this approach, and it is indeed bearing fruit. For us in the Pan-African Federalist Movement, to antagonize the classes of African economic or political leaders who are the allies by necessity, and I repeat, by necessity, of the imperialists, will only work in favor of the policy of divide to conquer, which has played a crucial role in our colonization and its transformation into neocolonialism. The third group that I will name that is an actor is the African intellectuals. The African intellectuals are a very heterogeneous group on the question of African political unity or end of neocolonialism. We find both within that group, it must convince militant as well as those who will spare no means for the preservation of a non-viable state and therefore of neocolonialism, because it ensures their bread and butter. The members of this group were trained in the colonial and or neocolonial schools. In doing so, they tend to become, voluntarily or involuntarily, the transmission belts of imperialist theories on African development that any informed person knows will never benefit Africans. They are the ones today who lead the NGOs, essentially focus on accommodation to the neocolonial system, or at best its reform. They are the ones who promote programs like YALI, created by President Obama, and which is nothing more than a means of brainwashing African youth for the benefit of American interests. They are the ones that Macron used to organize a fake debate between the French president and the African youth, which was primarily intended to repolish the image of France in the eyes of those who are expected to be the future leaders of the French precaré in Africa. It is they, I mean the intellectual, who through their academic publications make Africans believe that good governance, the reduction of corruption, and the democratization are ingredients without which a takeoff of our countries is impossible. What these intellectuals forget is that good governance and good management of the crumb left behind by the imperialists will never allow us to develop our countries. The massive oil drill in Angola, Ghana, Nigeria, as well as the huge sale of cocoa from Ghana and Ivory Coast only led to more impoverishment in these countries because only the crumbs remain in those countries. No domestic capital, which could be used to jumpstart their industrialization, was generated. All the surplus value in the exploitation of these resources was used for the fattening of imperialist profit. Only crumbs, which were in most cases used to fill the Swiss bank coffers belonging to the local servant of imperialism, or the maintenance alive of the workers in these sectors through meager salaries, were left behind by the imperialists. We all know that surplus value is what makes economic development possible. One of the challenges facing activists for African unity is the reorientation of the discourse on African development from its reformist attitude today, from reformist orientation today, to a systemic change, to the urgency of a systemic change, which is the sine qua non condition to form a developed African state. It is to meet this challenge posed by this biased training of African intellectuals for the benefit of imperialist interests that a group of African academics is working on the creation of a new school of thought on African development. Its raison d'etre is to work for the reorientation of the debate on development within the African intellectual class. Number four, the number four group is the group of individuals working against neocolonialism or committed to fight neocolonialism. With regard to the organization and individual working to end neocolonialism through the political unification of the African state, the great problem, great obstacle that they must imperatively overcome is their isolationist going solo attitude, which fuels absolute useless quarrels. It is to overcome this challenge that the call for the first Pan-African Fellows Congress was launched in Dakar in 2015. The main objective of this Congress is to create the optimal condition for a reunion of organizations and individuals who are sincerely ready to campaign together for the acceleration of the political unification of the African state. We have every reason to believe that this Congress will allow attendees to tune their violence and produce an action plan that they will implement themselves and that will allow them to achieve the political unification of the African state before we are recolonized by death. The worst form of colonization that has made Native Americans squatters in their ancestral land. The pre-first Pan-African Federal Congress was held in Accra and was opened by His Excellency Nana Akufo-Addo, President of the Republic of Ghana. More than 400 activists for African unity from more than 42 countries participated. We are inviting all African organizations and individuals to prepare for their participation in this Congress by joining their national delegation. Last but not least, let's talk about the African popular masses. The great difficulty with them is that they rarely make the connection between their lack of security and opportunities and the non-viability of their states. However, many of them are aware of the syndrome black skin, white mask, because there is practically no difference between the way the colonial and neocolonial system treat them. I have been asked many times by people in my village in Senegal, particularly peasants who have lived under colonialism, when is independence going to end? In other words, they are sick and tired of neocolonialism. We need to find the means and ways to help them understand that independence was only a first step. And next one is the mutualization of the management of certain portion of their national sovereignty and the creation of a new state, a state of the African people, by the African people, and for the African people. A federal state that will help their present state to become viable and capable of increasing exponentially the level of their security and their access to plentiful opportunities for the improvement of their living conditions. This work of raising the consciousness of the African popular masses can be done in record time by the millions of young Africans who are today desperately looking for a way outside the difficult condition neocolonialism has forced them into. The African youth of today considers in its overwhelming majority the pioneers of Pan-African federalism like Marcus Garvey, Kwame Nkrumah, Boganda, Lumumba, Modibo Keïta, Senghor, Ben Barka, Cheikh Anta Diop, Thomas Sankara, Sobukwe, Gaddafi, and so many others as their idol. This youth need to be guided in this action by people who are incorruptible and experienced in campaigning for a cause. The Pan-African Federalist Movement is building a campaign machine is building up a campaign machine for those people, made up of those people. If you believe that you are that type of person, we are inviting you to join our army of cadres that is accelerating the march towards the birth of the United African State before the end of the 2020s. In conclusion, dear sisters, I have been long, and brothers, I would say that the greatest challenge to end neocolonialism through the political unification of the African state is not the ability of the forces that oppose it to cause problem or trouble. The biggest obstacle is the inability of those who are advocating for it to stop their quarrels and tune their quarrels on the basis of a realistic strategy that could lead to their victory. The main ambition of the Pan-African Federalist Movement is to help make that happen. Let's end neocolonialism now by uniting our state politically. Thank you for your attention and patience. Thank you. I'm waiting for your question if you have any. Yes, John, I will indeed share my paper. If you provide me with an email, I will share it with you. John, also you mentioned that scientific socialism is a necessary process that must be part of the process of uniting Africa. Yes and no, Brother John. The fight for the political unification of the African state is a national question, not a class question. And in fact, if you visit carefully the Handbook to Revolutionary Warfare by Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, he clearly explained the three phases in the full emancipation of the African people. The first one is independence. The second one, he called it Pan-Africanism, but it is indeed African political unification. And the third phase, he called it socialism. Yes, Ikemba Ojere. I would say that, you see, Brother Ojere, Africans have a tradition of federalism the Mali Empire, the Ghana Empire, the cultural diversity that you see in Africa is possible because big entities have always respected the cultural differences. And the United African States, which will be a federal system, along the line of the Ghana Empire, the Mali Empire, and others, will indeed be respecting these cultural differences. And indeed, these cultural differences are essential. They are riches for the African people. And the federal system, of course, is not going to be like the US system where state rights are used to protect slavery or other forms of injustice, because there will be, in my opinion, a federal bill of rights for everyone. But the cultural issues will be fundamentally left not to the state, but to the pre-colonial communities. This is why we are studying the idea of cultural district, where you could have a Mande cultural district, where you could have a Yoruba cultural district, which will not be only limited to the area where people speak or are Yoruba, but Yorubas in any other place in the world could also be part of that. Amit Asili, you see, the right to live your life as you want to, as you wish to, the forbidding of the state to come into your bedroom or your home and tell you that this is how you should be behaving, that to me will be a federal right. And the right to believe in any religion, the right to marry whoever you want, whatever you want, all of those are, in my opinion, included in the individual right of the person. These are inalienable rights that no government should mingle into taking away. These are inalienable rights. These are rights, these are sovereignty issues, personal sovereignty issues that we could manage. We don't need a state to manage it for us. And it is the mixing of the comprehension or the misunderstanding of the difference of what exactly, why do we have states to begin with? We don't have states to do what we could do for ourselves. We have states to do what we cannot do for ourselves. And the right to choose whoever you want to marry is something you could do for yourself. The right to choose your religion is something that you could choose. So those are indeed, in my understanding, legal inalienable rights. Neocolonialism Sobukwe, it is not a phase of class struggle. No. Neocolonialism is a form of imperial domination. It is a mode of production of the capitalist of a country towards another. It is the extraction of surplus value from one country to another. If that is neocolonialism. It is the expansion of your market to another country. Yes, capitalism is a class system, and capitalism uses neocolonialism as a tool. Capitalism can reach the imperialist form and uses neocolonialism as a tool for expansion and improvement of profit. But neocolonialists, let me give you the example of Senegal. For we Senegalese, French neocolonialism is as devastating, let me just put it that way, as inhibiting on our right to develop the way we want for the bourgeois and the non-bourgeois. It is a national question, not a class question. Neocolonialism is a national question, and it is part of the fight for independence, for sovereignty. Sovereignty is not a class issue. I mean, in terms of the national, the state, the nation state model, those are debates, that, we don't know what would work for Africa and what wouldn't work for Africa, because Africa has not, first of all, we haven't, since the invasion of foreigners, we haven't experienced a state that we is by us for us. We have a colonial state and then a neo-colonial state still controlled by the outside. So what model will work or doesn't work, we don't know yet. We have to be able to have our own model. We have to have full sovereignty in order to be able to know what works and what doesn't work. To have all the constitution in the former French Africa, all the constitution, most of the constitution in the former British colonies are copies of what has the constitution of France and others. They are not from an emanation of the people. So what works and what doesn't work, we don't know. We have had states before colonialism. The first state that humanity has known are African states. And people know how these states function. State have to be a state in order to function, has to be based on the culture of the people, not on the culture of an outside people. Troy Joyner, are these milestones indicators and measures to make progress away from neocolonialism? Yes, the progress toward away from neocolonialism is how far have we come to unite our state. See, neocolonialism, as I explained, happened because a state is non-viable, is vulnerable, or just cannot manage every portion of sovereignty. This is why Kwame Nkrumah and them called for the United African State. This is why Americans, after getting their independence in 1783, realized that they are still neo-colonies of Britain. And this is why they call for a federal state that will be able to manage the portion of sovereignty that states like New York, Virginia, and others could not manage. So this is why we are calling for a unite. Yes, the process, neocolonialism is a form of dependency, a form of colonialism, like the word says. But it is caused not by the force of the other power, the imperialists, but because of the inability of the colonized or the neo-colonized to be in charge of the management of all the portions of their sovereignty. States like Senegal, like Gambia, like others, they cannot manage all their portion of sovereignty. They cannot ensure the security. That's why Mali called for the Russian to help them. This is why the Central African Republic called for the Russians to help them. This is why China is marauding Africa, because the state is just like a business, my brother, okay? The state is like a business. The income of the state must be able to help the state pay for all its commitment. The income of the state must be able to help. This is what a viable state starts with. For Nigeria, the state has to be stable enough in order to be able to develop politically. And the social capital of Nigeria is next to zero. This is why it isn't going anywhere. Exactly. Yes, Sobukwe. It is a national and class struggle. If you look at the example of China, for example, with Sun Yat-sen, or the example of the alliance of the Communist Party of China, PCC, it was indeed, when some people criticized Mao for the alliance with the Kuomintang, he said that the national question first and the class question next. How do I see the national liberation led by the African working class? Well, I don't have an a priori, being at least or just trying to have, being someone who have tried to commit class suicide and have a proletarian mindset in terms of development. Yes, that will be the ideal. But the reality, there is a difference between the reality and the ideal. Today, it is, in my opinion, much, much easier to free Africa from neocolonialism to the unification, political unification of our state, than to go back to a class movement that will uh, uh, that will alienate a good portion of Africans from this national liberation struggle. We must liberate ourselves before we choose what mode of production we will have. Right now, we are involved in a mode of production that is an imperialist mode of production. This is a foreign surplus sucking mode of production. In order for us to choose a mode of production, even if for the development of our own capitalists, of the local capitalists, then, in that case, yes, we could now go to the level of the class struggle because, but prior to being independent, and I have been with Thomas Sankara, I spent 2 years next to Thomas Sankara, and I see the limits of what a revolutionary state could do when it doesn't have full sovereignty. I lived it every day for 2 years being next to Thomas Sankara. So liberation is fundamental. Sovereignty is fundamental before you choose the mode of production. Because right now we don't have a mode of production, a domestic mode of production. We are sucked into a productive mode of production, which is the imperialist, which manifests itself as a form of capitalism in our countries. And that's not how we're going to develop. Will a federated Africa be democratic and socialist? I don't know what you mean by democratic and socialist. What I could tell you is that the color of the Constitution, the priorities of the United African States will depend on the actors who will be drafting this Constitution. If people who have a socialist-minded, progress-minded orientation are the majority or could win in the constitutional drafting, then the orientation of the government of the United African States will be towards socialism. But if the majority is anti-socialist, capitalist, and all, it will be leaning. And the example is that the Constitution of the United States was drafted by people who have a certain political leaning. And this is why the protection of profit is the priority of the United States of America. Amit, how were African states made to become non-viable? I'll give you an example of the Mali Federation. Okay, the Mali Federation, Modibo Keita and Senghor wanted, instead of the states, separate former French colonies in West Africa to be independent individually, to have independent individually, it's better to have a whole big entity that is viable to become independent together and become the Mali Federation. The French saw in that a threat to their future capacity to control the state. And this is why they broke the federation using Houphouët-Boigny with the Conseil de l'Entente to break this federation of Mali. The same thing happened in the Central Africa too, with Boganda. Making a state independent that doesn't have the capacity or the wherewithal to take care of its own business. That is what makes a state non-viable. The greatest observation that I can share with you with the time I spent with Thomas Sankara is that imperialism is our first enemy. The principal contradiction today for African people is the one between our people and imperialism, meaning neocolonialism, whatever. So the end of imperialist domination is the primary, must be the primary objective of any revolutionary. We saw that in Burkina Faso. I saw that in Thomas. When we did our budget in 1987, this is a budget that Thomas Sankara presented in August 7. Only 25% of our capacity to fund that budget existed. And I looked at Thomas and I said, but we are indeed a neo-colony here, because we are still using the CFA and we are depending on foreign powers to fund this budget for us. How could we be, And he laughed. He laughed like he's, if you knew Thomas Sankara, he's really, funny laugh sometimes, you know. And we understood imperialism, neocolonialism, ending neocolonialism, no, by any means necessary, with an alliance with all the classes of African people, is the fundamental goal that we must have now. If we don't defeat, if we don't defeat neocolonialism and imperialism and regain our full sovereignty, we will not be able to develop our state politically or economically. No way. Yes, Walt, indeed, that is why it reflects the interest of a majority, of a minority. Will custodial land in nations like Ghana be protected by a federated? Well, I cannot answer that question, Abdullah Sankofa. You see, I don't think that the federal government will mingle into how states that are member of the United African States manage their local affairs. There are only specific portions of the sovereignty of these states, which is, for example, foreign relations, which is money, which is debt, which is diplomacy, that will be indeed taken care of by the federal government. Any other portion that is not there, unless exercising that power is necessary to achieve the goal of the federal government, any other portion that is not listed there will remain in the hand of the state. What could we learn from the work of Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba as it relates to neocolonialism? Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba was a religious leader. He dealt with religious matters. So really, there is nothing in the work of Sheikh Bamba that I know personally that can help us deal with neocolonialism. One thing is that indeed, except on the cultural level, and even on that side, my brother, Sheikh Anta Diop was a Muslim. He was a Muslim, and we know that Islam, as much as Catholicism or Christianity, they are indeed a tax on our culture because it's a foreign culture being imposed on us. So I really don't have much to say about Sheikh Anta's work. Whatever, he is a murid. I am a Marxist, a socialist, atheist, whatever you want to call it. I believe in class struggle. I believe, but class struggle cannot be done in a haphazard way. National question is first. National question, sovereignty is first before you could even talk about classes. If you don't take care of the question of sovereignty, you cannot and you will not be able to develop your country, even if it's the best socialist system. Any other question? I think that we are getting towards the end. Those of you who want me to send them the document, please write your email on the chat. Libya under Gaddafi was in theory, an anti-imperialist. But we know with the fate of Gaddafi that Gaddafi was not able to protect himself against imperialism. Well, we know that. Thank you for leaving me your email. I will send you the text. It was a great pleasure. Your questions were fantastic, and I hope that I was not a nuisance in my development. I will hope it wasn't too long for you all. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Jabo. It was a pleasure. Thank you, Amit. Amit. Thank you very much, Sankofa. It was a pleasure being with you and spending this time. Peace and love.